The millionaire lost it all, but I, a janitor raising my child alone, changed her life in a single moment. I remember that night like it was yesterday. The millionaire lost it all, her empire crashing down in ruin. And there I was, just a janitor who cleaned her towering New York penthouse, struggling to scrape by and raise my son alone. That single moment changed her life, though no one outside those walls would ever believe it. Maybe you're working for someone who never says thank you or cleaning up while everyone else sleeps. Tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? I promise today's story will touch your heart. I'm Maria, middle-aged, worn from years of back-breaking work, but still standing. I wear my faded blue uniform like armor, the fabric rough from endless scrubs and spills. Each morning I wake before the city roars to life, the cold touch of the mop handle grounding me as I scrub away crumbs from the marble floors. The air smells faintly of lemon polish mixed with the bitter scent of exhaustion. My keys jingle softly as I move through the shadows of wealth I'll never own. The penthouse stretches 40 floors above Manhattan's chaos, but up here, silence presses against my chest like a stone. Mrs. Victoria Steinberg, that's her name, though she rarely uses mine. To her, I'm just the help, or you there. She built her fortune investing in stocks on the stock market, watching millions flow like water through her fingers. Her wealth in dollars seemed endless, at least on the surface. Bitcoin transactions, cryptocurrency portfolios, gold investments, words that floated around her phone calls while I scrubbed the baseboards, invisible as furniture. But beneath the steady rhythm of cleaning, my mind churns with one constant worry. How will I provide for my son today? Miguel is 14 now, growing fast in the Bronx with my sister Rosa. I send almost every paycheck home, keeping just enough for my tiny studio apartment in Queens and the subway fare to this gleaming prison. Last week, I missed his basketball game again. Rosa sent me a blurry photo of him shooting the winning basket. That night, my phone buzzed with Mrs. Steinberg's sharp voice. "Maria, stay late tonight. The guest bathroom needs deep cleaning. I can't have anything less than perfect." No, thank you. No acknowledgement that I'd been working 12 hours straight. Just more work. I remember clutching the phone with trembling fingers, staring at Miguel's photo on my cracked screen. His smile looked so much like his father's before Carlos left us when Miguel was 2, chasing dreams of quick money that never came. Now it's just me, sending almost every dollar home while I live on instant noodles and store-brand coffee. Some nights I count the coins in my purse just to feel like I have something, anything of my own. The penthouse gleams with cold perfection, Italian marble floors that show every fingerprint, crystal chandeliers that catch light like frozen tears, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, where families picnic while I scrub their crumbs from someone else's table. Mrs. Steinberg's collection of art hangs on walls I dust daily, paintings worth more than I'll earn in a lifetime. Her walk-in closet holds designer dresses with price tags that could pay Miguel's college tuition, yet she complains when I use an extra paper towel. "Maria, you're wasting supplies again," she said last Tuesday, her manicured nails tapping against granite countertops. "Do you think money grows on trees?" The irony wasn't lost on me, this from a woman who spent more on lunch than I make in a week. But I nodded, apologized, promised to be more careful. That's what we do, isn't it? We apologize for taking up space in their world. I think back to when I first started here, 6 years ago. I was desperate then, Miguel only 8, and Rosa struggling to feed her own 3 kids. The job posting promised good pay, benefits, respect. I remember walking into this place for the first time, my best shoes squeaking on that marble floor, my heart hammering with hope. Mrs. Steinberg barely looked at me during the interview. She was busy checking her stock portfolio on her phone, muttering about dividend payments and asset allocation. "You understand this is a high-end household," she said without looking up. "We expect discretion, efficiency, invisibility. Can you be invisible, Maria?" I nodded eagerly, not understanding then what she really meant. not understanding that invisible meant I'd lose pieces of myself in these pristine rooms, that my voice would grow smaller with each passing day. The work wasn't just cleaning. I became her shadow, anticipating needs she never voiced. I learned her schedule better than she knew it herself. Coffee at 6:30, exactly 2 sugars, served in the blue china cup. I memorized which newspapers she preferred, how she liked her towels folded, the precise angle of magazines on her nightstand. When her friends visited for their charity luncheons, I served their champagne and listened to them discuss their investment returns, while I remained as invisible as she'd trained me to be. But invisibility has its advantages. I hear things. I see things. I know that her marriage is held together by prenups and pride, that her son calls only when he needs money for his failing restaurant startup, that her daughter hasn't spoken to her in 2 years over some family business scandal. I know she takes sleeping pills and antidepressants, that she cries quietly in her bathroom while I clean the adjoining bedroom. Rich people think poor people are deaf and blind. We're neither. The small kindnesses were scarce, overwhelmed by an ocean of casual cruelty. When I caught the flu last winter and showed up anyway because I couldn't afford to miss work, she made me clean with a fever, then complained that I wasn't moving fast enough. When Miguel won a school science fair, and I showed her his photo with pride, she glanced at it for half a second before asking if I'd finished the silver polishing. When my sister called to say Miguel was asking why Mama never comes to visit, Mrs. Steinberg stood 3 feet away, tapping her foot impatiently because her lunch was 2 minutes late. "You know, Maria," she said one afternoon while I organized her jewelry box, "we're really like family here. We look out for each other." But when I asked for a small advance to help with Miguel's school supplies, she sighed as if I'd requested the crown jewels. "You people always want something extra. Can't you just be grateful for what you have?" You people. Those words cut deeper than her rejection. The microaggressions accumulated like dust in corners, small, persistent, poisonous. Her friends spoke about me in the third person while I stood right there. "She's good with stains," they'd say, or "she's quiet, which is nice." Never my name, never to my face. When delivery men or repair workers came to the penthouse, she'd introduce them by name but referred to me only as my housekeeper. I became a function, not a person. Money seemed to flow endlessly through this place. Mrs. Steinberg would casually mention dropping $50,000 on a weekend shopping trip, or her latest cryptocurrency investment yielding 6-figure profits. She owned gold bars stored in a private vault downtown, maintained multiple bank accounts across 3 countries, earned passive income from real estate investments I couldn't even pronounce. Yet when I asked for a cost of living raise after 3 years without one, she claimed the household budget was tight. "Times are challenging for everyone, Maria," she said, scrolling through her banking app showing 7-figure balances. "We all have to make sacrifices." My sacrifice was sending my son to bed hungry some nights. Her sacrifice was buying only 1 pair of designer shoes that month instead of 3. The loneliness was suffocating. Working in this tomb of wealth while my real life happened miles away, experienced through phone calls and text messages, Miguel's voice changing from boy to young man while I scrubbed strangers' floors. Missing his first day of high school because Mrs. Steinberg needed me to supervise a dinner party where guests discussed their multi-million-dollar business deals over wine that cost more than my monthly rent. I developed a ritual of walking through the penthouse after everyone left, touching surfaces I'd just cleaned, looking out those massive windows at a life I watched but never lived. Sometimes I'd stand in Mrs. Steinberg's closet, surrounded by silk and cashmere, and imagine what it felt like to choose clothes based on beauty rather than durability, to buy things because you wanted them rather than needed them. But then guilt would crush that brief fantasy. Miguel needed new shoes, Rosa needed help with groceries, and here I was playing dress-up in someone else's dream. One evening, reality cracked open like an egg. I was dusting Mrs. Steinberg's home office when she burst in, red-faced and shaking, her phone pressed against her ear. She didn't see me at first. I'd mastered the art of becoming invisible furniture. Her conversation was sharp, panicked, filled with financial terms I'd heard but never understood. Margin calls, leveraged positions, liquidity crisis. Her vast fortune, built on stock market investments and risky cryptocurrency trades, was crumbling faster than a house of cards. "What do you mean the Bitcoin wallet is compromised?" she screamed into the phone. "Those assets were supposed to be secure. My entire net worth was tied up in that portfolio." The golden tower of her wealth was collapsing, and she didn't even know I was there, witnessing the empire fall. When she finally noticed me, standing frozen with a dust rag in my hand, her embarrassment turned to rage. "Get out! Can't you see I'm busy?" But I'd already heard too much. The woman who treated me like dirt because of her money was drowning in debt, just like the rest of us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Miguel called to tell me about his day, his voice bright with teenage energy, and I realized I'd been living in two worlds, his real one and her artificial one, and somehow losing myself in both. After we hung up, I sat in my tiny Queens apartment, staring at the water stain on my ceiling, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The next morning, I arrived at work wearing the same uniform, carrying the same supplies, but something inside me had shifted. When Mrs. Steinberg snapped at me for leaving streaks on a mirror, instead of apologizing immediately, I looked her in the eye and said, "I'll fix it." Not, "I'm sorry." Just acknowledgement without self-flagellation. She seemed surprised by my calm tone, but I continued working, no longer shrinking under her gaze. Days passed and I began to notice things differently. The financial newspapers scattered on her desk told a story of desperation. Stock certificates for companies that had gone bankrupt. Letters from banks about overdue payments on properties I'd never heard of. Her drawer full of credit cards, most of them declined. The woman who'd built her identity on wealth was hemorrhaging money, and her cruel treatment of me wasn't really about me at all. It was about her own terror of becoming what she thought I was, powerless. But here's what she didn't understand. I was never powerless. I'd been surviving on scraps while she lived in abundance, managing my tiny income with skills she'd never needed to learn. I knew every discount store in Queens, every free activity for kids in the Bronx, every way to stretch a dollar until it screamed. I'd built a life from nothing while she'd inherited her foundation and watched it crumble. My strength came from necessity. Hers had come from numbers on a screen. The first time I said no to her was almost accidental. She demanded I work late on a Friday night, Miguel's birthday, to clean for a party she was hosting to impress potential investors. In the past, I would have canceled my plans, made up an excuse to Miguel, chosen her convenience over my heart. But that night, looking at the birthday card I'd bought for my son, I said, "I can't stay late tonight. I'll make sure everything is perfect before I leave. But I have a commitment." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Maria, this is important. Can't your whatever wait?" My whatever. My son's birthday was whatever to her, but instead of crumbling, I stood straighter. "I'll have everything ready by 5. If you need something after that, you'll have to handle it yourself." The words felt foreign in my mouth, but they also felt like truth. That night, I took the subway to the Bronx for the first time in months. Miguel's face when I walked through Rosa's door was worth every consequence I might face. We ate grocery store cake and watched his favorite movie, and I fell asleep on Rosa's couch with my son's head on my shoulder. For one night, I wasn't the woman who cleaned up other people's messes. I was Miguel's mother, complete and whole. Mrs. Steinberg's reaction the following Monday was predictable. Cold silence, extra tasks, little humiliations designed to remind me of my place. She didn't fire me. She needed me too much, and we both knew it. But the dynamic had shifted. I'd tasted my own power, and it was addictive as wine. Over the following weeks, I began to see her differently. The imperious woman who'd treated me like property was increasingly frantic, desperate, making phone calls that grew more pleading with each passing day. Her investment advisor stopped returning calls. Her business partners were dodging meetings. The cryptocurrency market had crashed, wiping out millions in her digital assets. The stock portfolios that had made her feel invincible were now worthless paper. Her net worth was evaporating like steam, and she was drowning in debts she couldn't pay. I started researching, not intentionally at first, just curiosity about terms I'd overheard. But my tiny Queens apartment became a classroom where I learned about markets and money, about the difference between wealth and cash flow, between assets and liabilities. I discovered that Mrs. Steinberg's fortune was built on leverage and loans, on borrowed money and borrowed time. When the house of cards collapsed, she was left with beautiful furniture and crushing debt. Meanwhile, my own small life was becoming richer in ways that couldn't be measured in dollars. Miguel and I started talking every night, really talking, not just quick check-ins between my exhaustion and his homework. Rosa visited my apartment for the first time in years, helping me hang curtains I'd finally bought for myself. I enrolled in an evening bookkeeping class at the community college, partly from curiosity and partly from hope. Learning about balance sheets and profit margins felt like acquiring a new language, the language of the world that had always excluded me. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in late October. Mrs. Steinberg had been making increasingly frantic phone calls all day, her voice growing shrill as each conversation ended in disappointment. Her accountant wasn't returning calls. Her lawyer was demanding payment for past services. The banks were closing in, and her millionaire facade was cracking like old paint. I was cleaning her office when she ended a particularly devastating call and collapsed into her desk chair, sobbing. Real tears, not the manipulative kind she used to get her way. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, human, broken, and despite everything she'd done to me, I felt something unexpected: pity. "Mrs. Steinberg," I said softly, "are you okay?" She looked up at me with mascara streaking down her cheeks, seeming surprised that I was still there, still human, still capable of compassion after all her cruelty. "I'm ruined, Maria," she whispered. "Everything's gone. The house, the investments, the business, all of it. I'm going to lose everything." And here's where the story takes its real turn. Instead of feeling vindicated or satisfied, I heard myself asking, what happened? She told me everything. The bad investments, the margin calls, the cryptocurrency collapse, the Ponzi scheme she'd unknowingly invested in. Her fortune, once valued in millions, had become debt measured in the same numbers. She was facing bankruptcy, foreclosure, the complete destruction of everything she'd built her identity upon. As she talked, something clicked in my mind. The bookkeeping classes I'd been taking, the financial literacy I'd gained from managing my own meager resources, the skills I'd developed from years of making nothing stretch to cover everything. I understood her situation better than she did. Her problem wasn't just the money she'd lost, it was that she'd never learned to live without unlimited resources. She'd never learned what I'd known my whole life: how to survive. "Mrs. Steinberg," I said carefully, "may I see your financial statements?" She looked at me with surprise. When had the invisible housekeeper become someone who understood financial statements? But desperation made her humble. She showed me everything: the crushing debt, the worthless assets, the cash flow crisis that was drowning her. I spent the weekend studying her situation, applying everything I'd learned in my night classes and from my own life of financial survival. By Monday, I had a plan. Not a miracle, not a magic solution, but a realistic path forward. It would require her to sell the penthouse, liquidate assets, live modestly while rebuilding. It would require her to learn skills she'd never needed before. It would require her to become, in many ways, more like me. "I can help you," I told her Monday morning, "but things would have to change around here." She stared at me with confusion and something that might have been hope. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath and said words I'd never imagined speaking to her. "I mean we'd be partners, not employer and servant. You need someone who understands money management and crisis survival. I need someone who understands business and has connections. We could help each other." The woman who'd treated me like furniture suddenly saw me as a person. The woman who'd never bothered to learn my son's name asked about Miguel's schooling. The woman who'd paid me scraps began to understand that my financial skills, born from necessity, might be exactly what she needed to survive her crisis. But here's where the story gets complicated, because real life is never simple. Her family, her entitled son, her estranged daughter, her husband who'd been living off her money for decades, they didn't take kindly to my new role. When they learned that the maid was giving financial advice to their golden goose, their reaction was swift and vicious. "Who does she think she is?" her son demanded during a family meeting I overheard from the kitchen. "She's just the help. Now she's trying to take advantage of Mom's situation?" Her daughter, who'd flown in from Los Angeles when she heard about the financial crisis, was even worse. "This is exactly what these people do. They wait for us to be vulnerable, then they move in like vultures." These people. There it was again, the phrase that reduced me to something less than human. But this time, instead of shrinking from it, I felt my spine straighten with quiet pride. These people survive every day on nothing. These people make miracles from scraps. These people know the value of $1 because we've earned every single one. The attacks got personal. They accused me of stealing, of manipulating their mother, of taking advantage of a desperate woman. They threatened to have me arrested, fired, deported, anything to get rid of the inconvenient truth I represented. But Mrs. Steinberg surprised everyone, including herself. "Maria stays," she said quietly. "She's the only one offering real solutions instead of blame." That's when I realized the real twist in this story. It wasn't about a poor woman helping a rich woman. It was about two women recognizing their common humanity across a divide that had seemed insurmountable. Mrs. Steinberg had been drowning in money just as surely as I'd been drowning in its absence. Her wealth had isolated her from reality just as completely as my poverty had isolated me from opportunity. Over the following months, we worked together in ways that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I helped her create budgets, something she'd never needed to do. She helped me understand investment principles, teaching me from her mistakes. I showed her discount stores and public transportation. She introduced me to business networking and professional development. We were both learning to live in a middle space neither of us had ever inhabited. The process wasn't smooth. There were moments when her old entitlement surfaced, when she expected me to work for gratitude instead of fair payment. There were moments when my own resentment flared, when years of humiliation threatened to poison my compassion. But we kept working at it, two women building something new from the wreckage of what came before. Miguel visited the penthouse for the first time that spring. Mrs. Steinberg had insisted on meeting him, and I'd been terrified of how that encounter might go. Would she see him as I did, brilliant, funny, kind, or would she see just another burden attached to her former servant? But when Miguel walked in, straightening his best shirt and shaking her hand with the good manners Rosa had drilled into him, something softened in her face. "Your mother has been telling me about your science projects," she said, and I nearly cried hearing her use the word mother instead of housekeeper. They talked for an hour about his school, his dreams of becoming an engineer, his worries about college costs. When we left that day, she pressed a card into my hand, not money, but contact information for a scholarship program she had learned about through her business connections. The penthouse was sold that summer. Mrs. Steinberg moved to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Nice, but not the palace she'd occupied before. I helped her pack, and she insisted I take several items she could no longer afford to keep: a beautiful lamp for my apartment, books for Miguel, a warm winter coat that fit me perfectly. "These aren't charity," she said firmly. "They're payment for services that were never properly compensated." My own life was transforming too. The bookkeeping skills I'd learned, combined with the business knowledge she'd shared, led to freelance work helping other small business owners manage their finances. Miguel started coming into the city on weekends, and we'd explore museums and parks I'd walked past but never entered during my years of servitude. Rosa visited more often, amazed by the changes she saw in me and in my relationship with Mrs. Steinberg, who she now called Victoria, person to person. By autumn, I'd left domestic work entirely. My client base had grown through word of mouth, and I was earning more money than I'd ever made cleaning houses, but more importantly, I was earning it with dignity. Victoria and I remained close. Our relationship evolved into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience. She'd learned to live within a budget. I'd learned to value my own expertise. She'd discovered that happiness didn't require millions. I'd discovered that my intelligence and intuition had always been valuable, even when nobody acknowledged them. The family members who'd been so cruel during her crisis suddenly wanted back in her life when she began to stabilize financially. Her son came around looking for investment in his restaurant. Her daughter called, asking for help with a down payment on a house. Her husband, who'd been suspiciously absent during the worst of the financial collapse, suddenly wanted to work things out. But Victoria had learned something important during her months of humility. She could see people's true character when money wasn't clouding her judgment. "It's funny," she told me over coffee one Saturday morning in her Brooklyn apartment. "When I had everything, I thought money was the most important thing in the world. Now I know the most important thing is knowing who stands with you when the money's gone." We were both different women than we'd been a year earlier. Her, more grounded and wise, me, more confident and empowered. Miguel graduated from high school that spring with honors and a full scholarship to study engineering. Victoria attended his graduation ceremony, sitting with Rosa and me in the bleachers, cheering as loudly as any family member when his name was called. Later, at the celebration dinner we shared at a restaurant in the Bronx, Miguel raised his glass of soda and said, "To Mama, who taught me that you don't need millions to be rich, and to Miss Victoria, who taught me that money problems don't have to break you." That night, riding the subway back to Queens, I looked at my reflection in the dark window and saw someone I barely recognized. Not the invisible woman who'd cleaned wealthy people's toilets while her own dreams gathered dust. Not the desperate mother who'd sacrificed every shred of dignity for her child's survival. I saw a woman who'd found her voice, her value, her power, not despite her humble beginnings, but because of them. The business I'd started grew steadily. I hired 2 women from my old neighborhood, teaching them the same bookkeeping skills that had opened doors for me. Victoria became my most enthusiastic referral source, connecting me with other business owners who needed financial guidance. "Maria saved my life," she'd tell them, "not with a miracle, but with wisdom and hard work." The respect in her voice when she spoke about me was worth more than all the money she'd once hoarded. Sometimes we talked about those early days, the cruelty and humiliation I'd endured in her penthouse. She apologized, not with the shallow words of someone trying to clear their conscience, but with deep remorse and changed behavior. "I didn't see you," she admitted. "I saw a function, a service, not a human being with her own dreams and struggles. I'm ashamed of who I was then." Her apology meant something because it came with acknowledgement and transformation. But I'd learned something important too. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It's about choosing not to let someone else's past actions poison your present happiness. I forgave Victoria not for her sake, but for mine. I refused to carry the weight of her old cruelty into my new life. The woman who'd treated me like dirt was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned humility the hard way. The woman who'd absorbed that treatment was gone too, replaced by someone who knew her own worth. 2 years after her financial collapse, Victoria's life had stabilized in ways that were richer than her former wealth. She lived modestly but comfortably, worked as a consultant, helping other businesses avoid the mistakes that had ruined her, and maintained relationships based on authenticity rather than financial advantage. Her family dynamics had shifted too. Those who genuinely cared about her remained close, while those who'd only valued her money had drifted away. My life had transformed beyond my wildest dreams, but not through sudden wealth or dramatic reversal of fortune. Instead, I'd discovered that the skills and strength I'd always possessed were valuable. I'd just been working in places where they weren't recognized or compensated fairly. The woman who'd managed to feed her family on minimum wage had the same talents as high-paid financial consultants. The difference was respect, opportunity, and the confidence to demand fair value for my expertise. Miguel started his second year of college that fall, studying engineering with a focus on sustainable development. He wanted to design systems that would help communities like the one we'd come from access clean water and reliable energy. "You taught me that real wealth is what you build that lasts," he told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "Money comes and goes, but education and character, that's permanent." Victoria and I still met regularly, our relationship having evolved into genuine friendship. We'd share coffee, discuss our respective businesses, laugh about the absurdity of our former dynamic. Sometimes she'd show me pictures from her old life, the penthouse parties, the designer clothes, the expensive vacations, and shake her head in amazement. "I thought that was happiness," she'd say, "but I was just numbing myself with luxury while my soul starved." One evening, as I was closing up my office, yes, I had an office now, nothing fancy but clean and professional, I reflected on the journey from that first moment when I'd said no to staying late on Miguel's birthday. That small act of self-respect had been like pulling a thread that unraveled an entire tapestry of self-denial and servitude. Every subsequent choice to value myself had made the next choice easier until self-respect became as natural as breathing. The woman who'd once counted coins in her purse now managed substantial sums for her clients, but more importantly, I'd learned the difference between having money and being controlled by it. Victoria had lost her fortune and found her humanity. I'd gained financial stability and rediscovered my dignity. Both transformations had been necessary. As I walked to the subway that evening, passing the glittering towers of Manhattan where I'd once worked invisible and unappreciated, I felt no bitterness toward my past. Every humiliation had taught me something about my own strength. Every moment of invisibility had shown me how much I could observe and learn. Every dollar I'd struggled to save had taught me financial skills that wealthy people paid consultants to provide. The greatest lesson hadn't been about money at all. It had been about recognition, not needing others to see my value, but learning to see it myself. Victoria's crisis had created an opportunity for me to help her, but my willingness to help despite our history had created something even more valuable. Proof that my compassion was stronger than her past cruelty, that my wisdom was worth more than her former wealth. That night, I called Miguel to share the news that his scholarship had been renewed for another year. As we talked, I could hear the pride in his voice when he mentioned me to his roommates. "That's my mom, the business consultant, not my mom, the cleaning lady," though I'd never been ashamed of honest work. The difference was that now I was doing work that challenged me, compensated me fairly, and connected me to a community that valued my contributions. Victoria called while I was cooking dinner, excited to share that she'd been invited to speak at a conference about financial resilience and recovery. "They want me to talk about how to rebuild after losing everything," she said, "but I'm going to tell them the real story about how I didn't save myself. A woman I'd treated terribly chose to help me anyway, and she taught me what real wealth looks like." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, small but bright, with herbs growing on the windowsill and photos of Miguel's achievements covering the refrigerator, and felt something I'd never experienced before: complete satisfaction with my present life. Not because it was perfect or because all my dreams had been fulfilled, but because it was authentically mine, built through my own choices and efforts rather than inherited or given. The story could end here, with two women who'd found friendship across class lines and a son achieving his educational dreams. But life is messier and richer than tidy endings. Victoria's former husband returned that winter, broke and desperate, asking for help that she was financially unable to provide, even if she'd been emotionally inclined to do so. Her son's restaurant finally failed, and he blamed her for not bailing him out. Her daughter, facing her own financial struggles, demanded access to assets that no longer existed. These family crises tested the lessons we'd both learned. Victoria struggled with guilt over not being able to help people she'd once supported financially. I watched her grapple with the difference between loving people and rescuing them, between helping and enabling. My own family dynamics had shifted too. Rosa no longer needed my constant financial support, and Miguel was becoming independent. I was learning to be Miguel's mother rather than his provider, to offer guidance instead of solutions. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. My business had grown enough that I needed to hire additional staff and find larger office space. Victoria decided to write a book about her experience, hoping that her story might help others facing financial crisis. We collaborated on a chapter about the relationship between class and character, about what happens when money leaves and reveals who we really are underneath the surface. Miguel's spring break visit that year was different from any before. He came not as a child visiting his struggling mother, but as a young man interested in her work and proud of her accomplishments. We toured my new office together, and he met my staff, women from backgrounds similar to mine who'd found their own paths to professional success. "You didn't just save yourself, Mom," he told me. "You're creating opportunities for others." That observation would prove prophetic. By summer, we'd launched a training program for women transitioning from domestic work to bookkeeping and business services. Victoria volunteer-taught sessions on business development and networking. I taught financial management and client relations. Our first graduating class of 12 women all found employment or started their own businesses within 3 months. The program attracted media attention, not because it was unique to help working-class women gain professional skills, but because of the unusual partnership between a former millionaire and her former housekeeper. Reporters wanted a simple story of role reversal, but we insisted on telling the more complex truth, that respect and opportunity had been missing from the equation, not ability or intelligence. During one particularly in-depth interview, the journalist asked Victoria what she'd learned from her rise and fall and recovery. "I learned that money is a tool, not an identity," she replied. "When I lost my fortune, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But I'd actually lost things that were keeping me from discovering what really mattered." When the same journalist asked me how I'd found the strength to help someone who'd treated me poorly, I thought carefully before answering. "Forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person," I said finally. "It's something you do to free yourself from carrying their mistakes forward into your new life." Victoria's past behavior was her problem. My response was my choice. I chose to respond with the person I wanted to become, not the person she'd made me feel like. The article, when published, resonated with readers across the country. We received letters from domestic workers who'd been treated as invisible, from wealthy people who recognized their own blindness in Victoria's story, from families navigating financial crisis, from anyone who'd ever felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The common thread in all these letters was the hunger for dignity, respect, and authentic human connection across artificial barriers. That autumn, Miguel started his junior year as a teaching assistant, helping other first-generation college students navigate academic challenges. Victoria's book was accepted for publication, with proceeds designated for our training program. My business had expanded to serve clients in 3 states, and I was invited to speak at conferences about financial literacy and economic empowerment. But the most meaningful change was the quietest one. I'd learned to take up space in the world without apology, to speak my mind without waiting for permission, to value my time and expertise as precisely as any professional should. The woman who'd once apologized for using an extra paper towel now negotiated contracts and set boundaries with confidence. One December evening, as the first snow began to fall over Brooklyn, Victoria and I met for our weekly coffee at a cafe near her apartment. We'd been meeting this way for over a year, our conversations ranging from business strategy to family updates to philosophical discussions about money, class, and human nature. That particular evening, she seemed contemplative. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd never lost the money?" she asked. "If I'd stayed wealthy and you'd stayed invisible?" I considered the question seriously. Without her financial crisis, we might have continued indefinitely in our original dynamic, she commanding, me complying, both of us trapped in roles that diminished our humanity. "I think we both needed the crisis," I said finally. "Not the pain of it, but the opportunity it created to become different people. Your money was keeping you from growing, just like my invisibility was keeping me from claiming my worth." She nodded, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "It's strange to be grateful for the worst thing that ever happened to you, but I can't imagine who I'd be now if I hadn't lost everything." As we walked to the subway together that night, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in 3 short years. From sending almost every penny home while living on scraps, to managing my own successful business. From hiding my intelligence to make others comfortable, to teaching workshops on financial empowerment. From raising my son long distance through phone calls and worry, to building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared pride in our accomplishments. The changes weren't just about money, though financial security had certainly made everything easier. The deeper transformation had been about agency, the ability to make choices based on my values rather than my desperation, to build relationships based on reciprocity rather than dependence, to contribute to my community from a position of strength rather than need. Miguel graduated that spring with highest honors and multiple job offers from engineering firms focused on sustainable development. At his graduation ceremony, I sat with Victoria, Rosa, and several colleagues from my business, surrounded by people who formed the family I'd chosen rather than simply inherited. When Miguel's name was called for special academic recognition, Victoria cheered as loudly as any of us, tears streaming down her face. Later, at the celebration dinner, Miguel stood to make a toast. "To my mom," he said, "who taught me that education is the investment that pays the best dividends and that dignity is worth more than money. To Miss Victoria, who showed me that losing everything can sometimes be the beginning of finding yourself. And to all the women here tonight who have proven that when one of us rises, we lift others with us." His words captured something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate, that our individual transformations had created ripples extending far beyond ourselves. Victoria's humility had restored her humanity. My empowerment had created opportunities for other women. Miguel's education was opening doors for environmental work that could benefit entire communities. None of these changes had happened in isolation. They were all connected, part of a larger story about what's possible when people choose growth over comfort, connection over control. The training program we'd started had grown into a non-profit organization serving women across the Northeast. Victoria served as executive director, using her business experience to secure funding and partnerships. I led the educational programs, drawing on both my financial skills and my understanding of the challenges facing working-class women. We'd helped over 200 women transition to higher-paying careers, but more importantly, we'd helped them discover their own value and voice. That summer, I took my first real vacation in decades, not a day off to handle family emergencies or catch up on rest, but an actual trip designed purely for my own enjoyment. Miguel and I spent a week in Costa Rica, hiking through cloud forests and visiting sustainable development projects similar to those he hoped to design. Victoria House sat my apartment, watering my plants and forwarding business calls with the efficiency of someone who understood the responsibility of other people's trust. Sitting on a beach at sunset, watching Miguel read a book about renewable energy while waves washed over our feet, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude, not just for how far we'd come, but for every struggle that had brought us to this moment. The woman who'd scrubbed floors while her son grew up miles away was gone, replaced by someone who could balance professional success with personal joy, who could offer help without sacrificing herself, who could accept prosperity without forgetting the lessons of poverty. The most surprising aspect of our transformation had been discovering that Victoria and I genuinely liked each other as people, separate from the circumstances that had brought us together. She was funny, intelligent, and surprisingly resilient. I was wise, creative, and more confident than I'd ever realized. Our friendship had grown from crisis and survival into mutual affection and respect, proof that authentic connection could bloom even from the most unlikely circumstances. When we returned from vacation, I found a letter waiting from a television producer who wanted to option Victoria's book for a movie. The letter discussed inspiring stories of redemption and unlikely friendships, language that made both Victoria and me slightly uncomfortable. Our story wasn't really about redemption. Neither of us had been criminal or immoral, just trapped in circumstances that limited our full humanity. And our friendship wasn't unlikely if you believed that mutual respect could transcend class differences. We agreed to meet with the producer, but only if we could maintain creative control over how the story was told. We didn't want a simple narrative of role reversal where the poor woman saved the rich woman and everyone learned a lesson about humanity. The real story was more complex. Two women recognizing their common ground across artificial divides, supporting each other's growth, and building something larger than either could have achieved alone. As autumn arrived again, I stood in my office late one evening, reviewing financial reports for the nonprofit and planning strategies for the coming year. The woman reflected in the dark window looked confident, purposeful, at peace with herself in ways I'd never imagined possible during those years of invisible servitude. I'd learned that dignity couldn't be taken, only surrendered, and that respect, like love, grows stronger when shared rather than hoarded. Victoria called while I was locking up, excited about a foundation grant that would allow us to expand the training program to 3 additional cities. As we talked about logistics and timelines, I marveled at how naturally we collaborated now, how seamlessly we'd learned to combine her strategic thinking with my practical experience. The partnership that had begun as mutual desperation had evolved into genuine teamwork based on complementary strengths. Miguel was in his final year of college, already accepted to a master's program in environmental engineering. He'd received multiple scholarship offers, including one funded by a foundation Victoria had connected him to. But beyond the financial support, he'd gained something more valuable, the understanding that his education was part of a larger purpose, that his success could create opportunities for others facing similar challenges. That December marked 4 years since the night I'd first refused to work late on Miguel's birthday, 4 years since I'd begun the journey from invisibility to empowerment. As I prepared for our annual holiday dinner, Rosa flying in from the Bronx, Miguel home from college, Victoria contributing her famous dessert, several colleagues from the nonprofit joining us, I reflected on how completely my definition of wealth had transformed. I had money in the bank now, more than I'd ever dreamed of during those desperate years. But the real wealth was in the relationships I'd built, the work that challenged and fulfilled me, the knowledge that I was contributing to something meaningful, the confidence to take up space in the world without apology. I'd learned that prosperity without dignity was poverty, and that dignity with purpose was the richest life possible. On Christmas Eve, as we gathered around my table, still small, but now large enough for everyone who mattered, Miguel raised his glass for a toast. "To second chances," he said, "and to the people brave enough to take them." Victoria nodded, tears in her eyes. "To the women who refuse to be invisible," she added, "and to the families we choose along the way." I looked around that table at faces illuminated by candlelight and love, at people who'd supported my transformation and allowed me to support theirs, and felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building a life authentic to your values. The journey from that cold penthouse to this warm kitchen had been longer and more complicated than any simple story of redemption could capture, but it had been worth every difficult step. As I write this now, 5 years have passed since that first moment of rebellion, that first small act of self-respect that changed everything. Miguel is finishing his master's degree and has already been hired by a firm specializing in sustainable infrastructure for developing communities. Victoria's book became a bestseller, and she's writing a second one about the training program we built together. Our nonprofit has helped over 500 women transition to dignified, well-paying careers. But the most important change is the quietest one. I wake up every morning knowing that my life belongs to me, that my worth doesn't depend on others' recognition, that my voice matters in conversations about things I understand. The woman who once apologized for existing has learned to take up exactly the space she needs, no more and no less than any human being deserves. If you're listening to this story and recognize yourself in the woman I used to be, invisible, overworked, undervalued, convinced that your struggles don't matter, I want you to know something. Your intelligence, your experience, your hard-won wisdom are valuable. You don't need anyone's permission to claim your worth. You don't need to wait for others to see what you have to offer. You can start exactly where you are, with exactly what you have, and build a life that honors your full humanity. The millionaire lost it all, and in losing everything, she found herself. The janitor gained respect, and in gaining dignity, she discovered her power. But the real story isn't about money or class or dramatic reversals of fortune. It's about what becomes possible when people choose to see each other clearly, to respond with their best selves rather than their wounded ones, to build bridges instead of walls across the divides that separate us. The years that followed brought changes I could never have predicted when I first walked into that gleaming penthouse with my heart full of hope and my shoes squeaking on marble floors. Miguel graduated with his master's degree and immediately joined a team designing water purification systems for rural communities in Central America. Victoria's second book, co-authored with me, became a blueprint for organizations helping women transition from service work to professional careers. Our nonprofit expanded internationally, with training centers in 12 countries. But perhaps the most profound transformation was the least visible one. The relationship between Victoria and me had evolved beyond friendship into something deeper. We'd become sisters, chosen family, two women bound not by blood or circumstance, but by the shared journey from brokenness to wholeness. We'd learned to celebrate each other's successes without comparison, to support each other through difficulties without judgment, to disagree on details while maintaining absolute respect for each other's wisdom. The media attention never fully subsided. Journalists continued to seek us out, particularly around Women's History Month or when economic inequality made headlines. They still wanted the simple story: rich woman falls, poor woman rises, but we'd learned to use their platforms to tell more nuanced truths. Victoria would speak about the isolation of wealth, the way money can insulate you from your own humanity. I would talk about the hidden talents that poverty often nurtures, the resilience that develops when you must create something from nothing every single day. My business had grown far beyond what I'd ever imagined possible. We now employed 47 people, most of them women from working-class backgrounds who discovered their own unexpected expertise in financial management. The office space we occupied, a restored warehouse in Queens, buzzed with conversations in 3 languages, filled with women who'd moved from cleaning other people's offices to running their own companies. Victoria's consulting practice specialized in helping successful people navigate financial crises with dignity intact. Her client base included entertainment figures, tech entrepreneurs, and old money families whose fortunes had evaporated through various combinations of bad advice, worse decisions, and simple bad luck. She'd found her calling in helping others avoid the mistakes that had cost her everything, and more importantly, in teaching them that their worth wasn't measured by their net worth. Miguel's career flourished in ways that made my heart swell with pride every time I thought about it. The little boy who'd eaten government-subsidized lunches was now designing systems that would provide clean water to hundreds of thousands of people. The teenager who'd asked why Mama never came to visit was now traveling the world, but he called me every Sunday no matter which time zone he was in. The young man who'd graduated high school with a grocery store cake celebration now owned a small house in San Jose, Costa Rica, where he'd invited me to visit whenever I wanted. Rosa's life had transformed too, though more quietly. With my financial support no longer necessary for her family's survival, she'd been able to pursue her own dreams. She enrolled in nursing school in her 50s, graduated with honors, and now worked in a community health clinic in the Bronx. Her 3 children, Miguel's cousins, had all finished college. The generational cycle of struggle was finally broken, not through luck or charity, but through education, opportunity, and the kind of systematic support that lifts entire families. Sometimes, walking through the streets of Manhattan where I'd once felt invisible and insignificant, I'd catch glimpses of other women in faded uniforms, moving through wealthy spaces like shadows. I'd see them in hotel lobbies, office buildings, luxury apartments, the Marias of today, working jobs that required them to be present but not seen, valuable but not valued. When possible, I'd strike up conversations, leave business cards, share information about our training programs. One autumn afternoon, I met Elena, a woman about my age who cleaned offices in the financial district. Like me, she was sending money home, in her case, to support her elderly mother and disabled brother in El Salvador. Like me, she worked long hours for low pay, her talents invisible to employers who saw only her function, not her potential. We talked over coffee during her break, and I saw my younger self in her tired eyes and determined spirit. I used to clean a penthouse, I told her, for a woman who thought I was just furniture with hands. Now I run a business with offices in 6 states, and that same woman is one of my closest friends. Elena looked skeptical, as I would have years earlier. "What changed?" she asked. "Everything," I replied, but it started with me changing how I saw myself. Elena enrolled in our next training cohort. 6 months later, she was managing books for 3 small businesses and earning more than she'd ever made cleaning. Her mother and brother moved to Queens, where Elena could care for them while building her new career. Watching her transformation reminded me that individual success means nothing unless it creates pathways for others to follow. The ripple effects of our work continued to surprise and humble me. Women who'd graduated from our programs started their own businesses, hired other women from similar backgrounds, became mentors and role models in their communities. Victoria and I received invitations to speak at universities, conferences, and community organizations around the world. The story that had begun in a Manhattan penthouse had somehow become part of a global conversation about dignity, opportunity, and the hidden potential in every human being. On Miguel's 30th birthday, celebrated in a restaurant overlooking Costa Rica's Pacific coast, with Victoria flying down to join us, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all to this moment. My son, now an accomplished professional making a real difference in the world. My friend Victoria, who'd lost millions but gained wisdom worth more than money. Myself, having discovered that respect and purpose were the only currencies that truly mattered. "You know what amazes me most about our story?" Miguel said as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and coral. "It's that you could have stayed bitter. Both of you had every right to hate each other, to let the past poison your future. Instead, you chose love. You chose growth. You chose to see possibilities where most people would only see problems." Victoria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Your mother saved my life," she told Miguel. "But not in the way people think. She didn't save me from financial ruin. I could have figured that out eventually. She saved me from the kind of person I was becoming. She reminded me that wealth without humanity is just expensive emptiness." As we sat there, 3 people whose lives had become intertwined in ways none of us could have predicted, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from understanding that your struggles had meaning, that your choices had consequences beyond yourself, that your story could light the way for others walking similar paths. The woman who'd once counted coins in her purse while her son grew up miles away had learned to count blessings instead of money, relationships instead of returns, moments of genuine connection instead of material accumulations. The millionaire who'd lost everything had discovered that the most valuable things couldn't be lost because they lived inside her character, her capacity for growth, her willingness to be vulnerable and real. And somewhere in Queens, in the Bronx, in communities across the country and around the world, other women were discovering their own power, claiming their own worth, refusing to remain invisible in lives that belonged to them. The story that had begun with one moment of self-respect, my decision to attend my son's birthday instead of working late, had become a movement, a ripple that continued to spread in directions I couldn't predict or control. As I write these final words, now a woman in her 50s, with silver threading through my dark hair and laugh lines mapping the joy I'd discovered in midlife, I want to leave you with the most important lesson I've learned. You don't need permission to value yourself. You don't need anyone else's recognition to know you're worthy of respect, opportunity, and love. You don't need to wait for perfect circumstances to begin building the life you deserve. The millionaire lost it all, and in her loss, discovered what was real. The janitor found her voice, and in speaking up, created space for others to do the same. But the deepest truth of our story isn't about us at all. It's about you and every person who's ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or undervalued. It's about the power you have right now, in this moment, to choose dignity over desperation, growth over grievance, connection over bitterness. Your story is waiting to be written. Your voice is waiting to be heard. Your potential is waiting to be discovered, not by others, but by you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, or known someone whose contributions went unrecognized for too long? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this message touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach other women who work with dedication behind the scenes. For more emotional journeys like this one, we've created a special podcast with equally moving stories. You can find it here by clicking on the left. Thank you for joining me in this story of quiet triumph and rediscovered dignity. I'll see you in the next chapter of these hidden lives that matter more than anyone knows.